Good morning. Thank you for being here today. Thank you especially to our witnesses for appearing before our committee, and we look forward to your testimony. Our small business in the tourism industry need to significantly increase their workforce during peak seasons. For businesses in my district, the high season is well underway. South Carolina's Grand Strand is one of the top tourist destinations in the country, but has a fairly small year-round work population. From April to August, Myrtle Beach hotels, resorts, restaurants, and other tourism-related businesses are welcoming vacationing guests from across the country. Having a well-trained and reliable staff is a critical component to having a successful seasonal business. Companies located in small, often rural towns that rely heavily on tourism to sustain the local economy have a difficult time finding enough local workers to fill seasonal jobs. Employers that cannot find American workers to fill these seasonal jobs rely on H-2B visa programs to supplement their local workforce. The H-2B visa program allows businesses to bring in temporary foreign workers to fill lesser skilled, non-agricultural jobs. H-2B visas are capped at $66,000 per year nationwide. While the program is relatively small, it is heavily relied upon by small seasonal businesses, including those in the tourism industry. Utilizing the H-2B program is a time-consuming and costly process which involves several agencies, including the Department of Labor and Department of Homeland Security. Unfortunately, these departments are making the process even more difficult during a critical time for small businesses. Both the Department of Labor and the Department of Homeland Security recently suspended H-2B visa applications for a month. Although processing was restarted in late April, the suspension of the program caused a backlog. Some small businesses that were expecting their H-2B workers to arrive before Memorial Day are still waiting. Being short-staffed is leading to a strain on existing resources of small businesses. In addition, a recent regulatory change that is immediately effective changes the way wages are calculated for H-2B workers and U.S. workers recruited in connection with the H-2B process. Businesses that have received new wage rates from the Department of Labor since the new rule was implemented are seeing an average wage increase of 32%, according to a nationwide survey. The impact of the increased cost is especially significant for small businesses that have set up their seasonal rates or have existing contracts. These businesses that operate on thin margins have little or no flexibility to offset the increased labor cost. I'm very concerned that the H-2B program may be regulated out of existence. That would have a dire effect on small businesses that rely on this program to supplement their local workforce to meet their seasonal hiring needs. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the H-2B visa program and its importance to small tourism businesses, as well as how the recent suspension of the program and regulatory change will affect small businesses that rely on the program. I now yield to Congressman Payne for his opening remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us to offer their insight and experience on the H-2B visa program. This program is a critical tool for many businesses to find the labor they need during peak seasons when American workers aren't available to fill the positions. However, it is our job in Congress to create the right balance between promoting economic growth, protecting the rights of all workers, and supporting American jobs. Businesses large and small take advantage of the H-2B visa program to fill seasonal jobs in non-agricultural sectors for which they cannot find American workers. Companies in landscaping, forestry, tourism, seafood processing, and housing construction industries have high demand for H-2B visas. In order for a business to participate in the guest worker program, they must first try to recruit American workers. If they can prove that there is a valid labor shortage for these types of jobs, then they can receive a certification from the Department of Labor. They also have to pay foreign workers the prevailing wage in the industry and ensure good working conditions. However, in these difficult economic times, we need to ensure that the nearly 12 million American workers that are unemployed have access to good jobs with wages and that protect workers' rights. We need a system that allows small businesses the access to the labor that they need while protecting the wages and the working conditions of these workers, whether they are American or foreign. The recent regulatory changes issued by the Department of Labor and the Department of Homeland Security have changed the methodology used to calculate the wages guest workers are paid. Small businesses have legitimate concerns about how these changes will impact them. The court-mandated suspension of the H-2B visa program this spring created an uncertainty for many of the businesses who take advantage of the program. And many worry that the new rule will disrupt small business operations because they have already signed contracts based on lower labor costs. They operate at narrow margins and are dependent on these foreign workers that they might not be able to get, according to the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy. In theory, this program could be a great resource to both businesses and temporary guest workers if it is finely tuned to the market's needs and adequately supports businesses and workers, immigrant and American alike. Unfortunately, the program today has flaws that allow bad players to abuse the program and the workers that participate in it. I've heard numerous stories proving that some employers are using this program to exploit foreign workers, failing to pay the appropriate wages and overtime needed, and also not supplying the safety equipment that these employees need. This unlawful behavior undercuts American workers and American businesses that are playing by the rules. Take, for example, the more than 500 skilled Indian HB2 guest workers who were lured to the United States by the shipyard company Signal International. After the promise of green cards, family visas, and fees up to $20,000, Signal recruited these workers to come to the U.S. to repair oil rigs after the damage from Hurricane Katrina. These workers were forced to live and work in labor camps under harsh conditions and were bunked 24 people to a room. They were threatened with deportation if they complained. When the workers accused Signal of illegal human trafficking, the company reported them to the immigration authorities. This isn't fair to those workers, and it isn't fair to Signal's competitors that were following the law. Thankfully, not all businesses that participate in the H-2B visa program are bad actors like Signal. But for many, this case has come to represent some of the flaws and pitfalls for immigrants and for employers in the H-2B temporary guest worker program. As this committee considers this new rule, and as Congress debates changes to our immigration system, we must ensure American businesses have the labor they need while making certain that workers are protected as well. We also need to make the American workforce our #1 priority, and we should not undercut these American workers. It is a reality that the economic growth for small businesses depends on an immigrant workforce to fill the labor demands caused by shortages in various U.S. sectors. American small business owners are the largest employers in the nation and are impacted greatly by immigration reform. I believe we should address these issues in a comprehensive reform that will ensure small businesses access to the workforce while at the same time meeting the labor needs and maintaining functional laws that will modernize America's immigration system. This hearing will present both sides of this critical issue so that we can properly understand the advantages and challenges of the H-2B visa program as both houses of Congress debate immigration reform. With that, I look forward to hearing your testimonies. Thank you, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. If additional members have opening statements prepared, I ask they be submitted for the record. I'd also like to take a minute to explain the timing lights to y'all. You each have 5 minutes to deliver your testimony. The lights in front of you will start out green. When you have a minute remaining, it'll turn yellow, and when your time's up, it'll turn red. If you're close to the end, obviously we'll be a little lenient on the time. Nobody's going to throw a hook out there. Our first witness is my friend, Brad Dean. Brad is the president and CEO of the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce in South Carolina. The Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce has more than 2,700 members and serves the business community throughout the Grand Strand from Little River to Pawleys Island. Before joining the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Dean opened and ran the Hard Rock Cafe in Myrtle Beach. Currently, he serves on the board of directors of the South Carolina Tourism Alliance. And I'll also tell you, Mr. Dean is an innovator in tourism. He has done wonderful things with our area, and very proud to have him in our area. Welcome, Mr. Dean. You have 5 minutes to present your testimony.
Well, thank you, Chairman Rice, Ranking Member Payne, and other members of this committee. As Congressman Rice mentioned, I'm Brad Dean from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The organization that I represent serves in businesses that employ over 50,000 American workers in South Carolina. And I appreciate your invitation to testify today on a matter that's important to businesses throughout America, and particularly in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and that is the seasonal employment needs of small businesses in our tourism industry. Myrtle Beach is a small town. We only have about 30,000 residents, but this year we expect to welcome more than 15 million visitors to our community. As you might imagine, tourism is a huge economic generator for our community. A $7 billion annual economic impact supports over 74,000 jobs in our small community. And as you might expect, it also pays for a lot of important public services like police, firefighting, and education and infrastructure. One challenging aspect of our tourism industry is the seasonality. We will conduct more than 60% of our business in the months of June, July, and August. And while we welcome that influx into our community in the summer months, that certainly presents some unique challenges for our community. And one of those challenges is the handling of employment for small businesses during the peak season. To attract employees, local businesses take a number of steps each year. They advertise in newspapers, online websites, they host job fairs, and participate in their own independent hiring events. They also hire students who reenter the workforce for the summer, retirees who reenter the workforce, albeit temporarily, and they also employ workers from outside our county and actually help to pay for transportation to bring those workers to and from the job. Yet despite our best efforts, seasonal jobs remain unfilled each and every year. We have found ourselves needing temporary seasonal workers in both good and bad economic times. The economic reality for us is very simple. During our peak tourism season, when business doubles or triples and several thousand jobs are added to our community, we do not have enough American workers to fill our temporary employment needs. The H-2B visa program, which supplies approved temporary workers at a fair wage, is essential to our economic success. The businesses that I represent pay competitive wages and successfully hire thousands of hardworking Americans for both full-time and part-time jobs. They pay seasonal workers a market-based wage that is documented and approved by the Federal Government. And though the H-2B program is often complex and costly for small businesses, it is a necessary tool for our local businesses that creates a win-win scenario for our business community. Employers find reliable, trained temporary workers to fill temporary jobs which would otherwise go unfilled. Temporary workers voluntarily come here to earn a fair wage, pay taxes, and learn our language and our customs. American workers enjoy full-time pay and benefits in businesses that succeed in part by the hiring of H-2B visa workers, and our economy benefits by optimal business activity and the fair collection of all taxes owed. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. If temporary jobs go unfilled, everyone loses. While our businesses willingly use the current H-2B visa program out of necessity, the process for hiring an H-2B visa worker could be improved upon. We would encourage Congress to consider opportunities to improve the efficiency of this program, streamlining some of the onerous requirements and making it less burdensome for small and medium-sized businesses. And we should seek to prevent the processing delay experienced by small businesses using this program this year. The uncertainty in agency action and the regulation of the program presented a barrier for a lot of businesses that we're experiencing right now at the peak of our summer season. Seasonal hiring was deterred for several weeks, and that has made a lengthy, costly process even longer and more costly. Now, critics of the program might try to confuse the issue and make this part of the immigration debate or suggest that this is simply about displacing American workers, but that is not true. The real issue here is about jobs and enabling American small businesses to do what they do best, create jobs and put American workers back to work. Let me assure you that a guest worker program is not a luxury. Rather, it is a business necessity. And without the H-2B program, a seasonal tourism destination like Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, will struggle. But with it, we enjoy a level playing field, and our businesses are given a fair chance to succeed. In closing, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of this committee, I humbly offer you a gentle reminder that the laws you create can provide small businesses greater confidence and clarity, a willingness to grow and invest, and the opportunity to succeed. Likewise, you can create laws that stifle growth and limit job creation. I encourage you to bear in mind the needs of small businesses, the single largest creator of jobs in America today. Recognize that for communities dependent upon a seasonal tourism industry, temporary guest workers are a business necessity, and the H-2B visa program is one very small but important part of a successful economy and should be given fair consideration. On behalf of the nearly 3,000 businesses I represent, I encourage you to make this a priority, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Our second witness is Sarah DeMint, owner of the Beechmore Inn in Algonquin, Maine. She's a third-generation innkeeper. For 76 years, members of Ms. DeMint's family have owned and operated the Beechmere Inn, which is located 87 miles north of Boston on the coast of Maine. Ms. DeMint was honored recently with a Real Hero Award from the American Red Cross of Maine's Southern Maine chapter for assistance she provided to the families affected by Hurricane Sandy. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to present your testimony.
Thank you for having me, Chairman Rice and ranking members of the committee. As you have heard, I am a third-generation hotel owner from Algonquin, Maine. It's not easy to say. And I do appreciate you inviting me here to speak to you about seasonal employment needs. We operate a year-round 73-room property in Algonquin. We've been using H-2B program on and off for over 10 years, as we've had a very difficult time hiring seasonal workers to support our housekeeping needs during the peak summer and fall seasons. This year, we had to drop out of processing due to the application that was stuck in limbo when the DOL stopped processing earlier this year. We could not wait with uncertainty to find out if we would get our approvals. Algonquin is located only 87 miles north of Boston and 6 hours from New York City. Yesterday, I left my office at 10:30, and I was in downtown D.C. by 3. We're a very popular community resort. We operate at almost 100% occupancy for July, August, and September, dropping down to a nice 85% occupancy in October. That's a lot of guests, rooms, meals, and amenities that we provide daily. Tourism is the primary industry in our region and is the #1 industry in Algonquin. We have 1,100 residents in Algonquin. We have 44 restaurants and over 2,500 hotel rooms. I clearly do not pull from our local community in order to assist us for hiring. There are many neighboring towns to compete with for employees. Kennebunk, York, Wells, Biddeford all pull from one area that has the most employees to offer for hiring, and that is Sanford, Maine, a community of approximately 22,000 residents. That's a big town for us. From Portland, Maine to New Hampshire border, there's 18,000 hotel rooms that need to be cleaned on a daily basis during the summer and the fall season. Starting level housekeeping wages earn anywhere from $9 to $10 to start. I've never paid minimum wage since I've joined the business in 1995. We currently have 14 housekeepers, but we need 17 to run our operations smoothly. As we employ mostly working mothers, we make accommodations for part-time and flexible hours to keep them employed year-round. We are a year-round business. We offer benefits for our employees, retirement plans, vacation pay, sick time, and reviews to keep them to encourage growth and leadership within the departments. H-2B workers are essential to our operation, and they are seen by our employees as a critical backup they need during the summer and fall months. I've tried to recruit in many ways for seasonal housekeeping. I do the normal advertising through the internet, newspapers, and so forth, but I've also tried to reach out to college students. Unfortunately, the closest educational facility is 22 miles, but yet takes 40 minutes to commute from. College students are focused on resume building, starting in freshman year. They are primarily taking internships during the day and working a job at night. Housekeeping needs to be done during the day. Last weekend, I tried to recruit high school graduates while I attended my cousin's graduation in Bangor, Maine, and not one student was interested coming down to work for the summer as a housekeeper. We've also tried to recruit in northern Maine, where I placed ads up in the county, which brought in a few interested applicants. But unfortunately, because it is a seasonal job and the high cost of housing in a very resort community, I was not able to bring them down for the short term that they would be here. The complications of bringing their family or leaving them behind quickly made these jobs undesirable. H-2B workers are paid the same rate as those we hire from the American workforce. They are in some instances even paid more, as they've been returning for season after season. We built new housing for them in 2008, some with ocean views, all within a 100-foot walk of our property. They're eligible for retirement benefits, workers' comp insurance, bonuses, as well as weekly shopping trips to be able to purchase for their families at home. Hiring H-2B workers is not easy or inexpensive. We pay up to $3,100 in agency fees, as well as $1,700 in U.S. CIS fees related to processing of that paperwork. All transportation is paid by us to and from their home country. Prevailing wage that was determined for us earlier this year before we dropped out was $9.39 an hour. That was in February. It was then revised to $10.54 an hour in May. That's an increase of $1.15 an hour. I am well into my season at that point. I've already published my rates, and I've already hired and have committed to hotel rooms at rates. I am not able to change my revenues based on change in costs for employees. The impact of not having H-2B workers for our property this season is already being felt. We've had to move to a 6-day work week. We are pulling employees from various departments, and we're not able to have full coverage in all of the areas. That means that my GM as well as myself are cleaning rooms. Not having seasonal coverage puts my entire team at a pace that is not conducive to lasting the season. Housekeeping is not an easy sedentary job. H-2B workers come with the knowledge that they are here for a short time to help us cover a seasonal job. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. DeMint. I'll now yield to Congressman Payne to introduce the next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next witness, William Spriggs, serves as the Chief Economist to the Afl-Cio and is a professor and in the former chair of the Department of Economics at Howard University. Bill assumed these roles in August of 2012 after leaving the executive branch of the U.S. government. Before August, Bill was appointed by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 2009 to serve as Assistant Secretary of the Office of Policy at the United States Department of Labor, taking a leave of absence from Howard University to do so. At the time of his appointment, he also served as chairman of the Healthcare Trust for UAW retirees of the Ford Motor Company and as chairman of the UAW retirees of the Dana Corporation Health and Welfare Trust, and on the Joint National Academy of Sciences and National Academy of Public Administration Committees on the Fiscal Future of the United States, and also as a senior fellow of Community Service Society of New York. Mr. Spriggs' previous work experiences includes roles leading economic policy development and research as a senior fellow and economist at the Economic Policy Institute, as senior vice president for the National Urban League, and over 100-year-old leading civil rights NGO in the U.S., as a senior advisor for the Office of Government Contracting and Minority Business Development for the U.S. Small Business Administration, as a senior advisor and economist for the Economics and Statistics Administration for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and as an economic, well, you've been busy. And then and also as an economist for the Democratic staff of the Joint Economic Committee on Congress, and as a staff director for the Independent Federal National Commission for Employment Policy. While working on his Ph.D. in economics from the University of Wisconsin, Bill began his labor career as co-president of the American Federation of Teachers Local 3220 in Madison, Wisconsin. He's a member of the National Academy of Social Insurance and the National Academy of Public Administration. Mr. Spriggs.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Chair, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to testify before your committee. On behalf of Richard Trumpka and the whole Afl-Cio family, we want to make sure on the record that we share our condolences with Congresswoman Chu on the loss of her mother, and we're very sorry that she couldn't be here, and we hope that you will be able to convey to her our concerns at this time. I want to thank the ranking member and Mr. Keating, Mr. Schneider, Mr. Barbour for joining us as well. Today we stand over 5 years into the wrath of the Great Recession. The number of payroll positions in America remains over 2.4 million less than in January 2008. At the rate of job creation last month, it would take more than 13 months to get back to the pre-recession level of employment, meaning a net job growth of 0 jobs over almost a 6.5-year period. In the interim, America's labor force has grown over 1.5 million and will grow larger over the next year. The result is a backlog of Americans looking for jobs, over 11.7 million Americans. The brunt of the difficulty in the labor market has fallen on young workers who are suffering from the lowest levels of employment on record in American history. Fewer than 38% of 18 and 19-year-old Americans have a job. That's the lowest ever in American history. Among those 20 to 24, the share with jobs is below 61%, well below the full employment levels when the figure should be 13 percentage points higher. And for those with jobs, wages have been essentially flat, rising only 3% over this period when adjusted for inflation. So to put it bluntly, we are still in the midst of an American jobs crisis, especially for entry-level jobs for young Americans. It has never been more crucial for America's policymakers in Congress and in the administration to pull together to ensure job opportunities for the almost 12 million Americans looking for work and to protect the wages of those at work, many of whom are working part-time but would like to work full-time. An important policy would be for Congress to join with the administration to ensure that job opportunities being created are fully available to millions of Americans looking for work while protecting the wages of those people. Straddled with court cases and appropriation blocks from Congress, the administration has delayed several times the implementation of new rules over the use of temporary non-immigrant workers in entry-level jobs like young Americans desperately need. Over the course of the recovery, Congress has worked with the administration to pass various tax cuts aimed at helping small businesses, in particular, add workers, ranging from the Small Business Jobs Act to the HIRE Act. These tax cuts have given small business extra incentives to add workers to their payrolls, but these efforts will be undermined if the jobs are given to non-immigrant temporary workers or if workers are brought in with wages to undercut the competitiveness of small businesses struggling to take advantage of the tax cuts and boost their local economy. The loser when wages are set low by a few firms are not just Americans denied job opportunities, but the hardworking businesses and their employees fighting to restore an economy that works for everyone. The economic analysis done by the Department of Labor to study its interim final rule found that there are just 79,000, on average, 79,000 H-2B positions that are open in the United States that are being applied for. Unfortunately, the regulations for the program have been caught in struggles that have hurt businesses that may have need of the program and delayed policymakers from coalescing around a sound set of policies that protect the Americans looking for jobs and need access to them. The courts have not accepted the premise that the Department of Labor could adopt multiple wage levels for the jobs typical of the H-2B program. The findings of the court appear consistent with the BLS characterization of these jobs as having relatively lower skills compared to many jobs, and therefore a wage structure that does not reflect skill differences. The source of the Department's wage rule is the Occupational Employment Statistics Administration studies. The OES is a huge database that covers over 1.2 million different U.S. establishments and captures 62% of employment. Given the size of the samples and the technical issues involved in designing a proper probability-based sample, similar to the BLS, the need for accurate, reliable, and replicable results in policymaking mean that the costs are really prohibitive for employers to do such studies. If employers pay below the average wage for an occupation, they really lower the wages for the area. And so I think the Department has set the wage at the correct level. More could be done to protect the wages of American workers. We need to think about those businesses that have entered into collective bargaining agreements with their workers. We have to think about those employers who are Federal contractors and are trying to live up to rules under Davis-Bacon Act and Service Contract Act wage rules. Unfortunately, many H-2B workers gain access to the program through foreign labor recruiters who illegally charge the worker fees. Many H-2B workers then arrive in America already in debt. The result is that much of those foreign workers earn has to be repatriated to pay for foreign labor agents and recruiters. This is why it is important to coalesce around a rule that can work for everyone and protect us from that kind of abuse. I just want to conclude by pointing out that, yes, the tourism industry is an important industry in the United States. That means that we should be sure that our policies are giving Americans the best opportunity to acquire the jobs, experience, and skills to excel in industries we want to promote through public policy. To maximize the potential for gathering the full value added of the industry, it is essential that we turn to the millions of unemployed Americans for these jobs. Yes, the demand for these jobs is seasonal, but to young people looking for entry-level positions, these are good steps. And to many companies hiring Americans in the tourism industry, it is very important to keep them protected from low-wage competition that undercuts their efforts to protect and promote middle-class American values. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to yield to Congressman Keating to introduce the next witness.
Well, thank you, Chairman Rice and Representative Payne. I also want to thank Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Velasquez, and also keep Ranking Member Chu in our thoughts today. I have the privilege of introducing one of our esteemed witnesses, Jane Bishop, who is a constituent of mine. Jane's a founder and president of Peak Season Workforce. Peak Season Workforce is a family-owned small business based in Mashpee, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, and was created to fill a demonstrated local need and understanding of the complexities of government filings to successfully obtain H-2B work visas. Over the years, Peak Season Workforce has grown from assisting transportation and hospitality businesses on the Cape and islands of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket to representing scores of businesses in New England and across the nation to fill seasonal jobs with international workers when American workers were not available. Known affectionately as Mama Visa, Jane brings an exceptional knowledge of Federal and State visa rules and decades of experience previously working in D.C. as the president of an international student travel agency. She was an authorized Federal visa signer and a successful innkeeper on Cape Cod. So I welcome her and welcome the opportunity to introduce her. I would take note that I'm in the midst of taking testimony on the Ethics Committee, and I might be leaving. It has nothing to do with anyone's testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rice and Congressman Payne. Thank you for holding this important hearing and for the opportunity to present testimony. I also want to thank my Congressman, Bill Keating of Massachusetts, for his presence here today and for his untiring support of the small businesses that employ H-2B international workers. My name is Jane Nichols Bishop. I'm the president of Peak Season Workforce of Mashpee, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. For more than a decade, we have successfully helped seasonal tourism-based businesses navigate the intricate government filing process to successfully obtain H-2B work visas. We do not charge international workers any fees. Our fees are paid by employers exclusively. Incidentally, we are a small family-run business with just 3 employees, including myself. I represent more than 100 employers seeking H-2B work visas to supplement their American workforces during peak visitor seasons. I represent, for example, hotels, motels, inns, bed and breakfast establishments, restaurants, clam shacks, pizza shops, public transportation operator, coffee shops, and golf courses. All of them experience a significant increase in business during the season. These businesses depend on workers with H-2B visas to fill essential jobs. My client employers that use H-2B international workers are not able to find enough U.S. workers to fulfill their staffing needs. They use workers from abroad to supplement, not replace, Americans in their workforce. Each of my employers hires American workers but does not have enough of them during their busy season. This year, small businesses encountered a particularly vexing problem that threw a last-minute monkey wrench into the application process and caused costly delays of many visa applications. On March 21, a Federal judicial ruling ordered the Labor Department to stop issuing new prevailing wages because of an alleged flawed methodology that had been used successfully since 2008. The Labor and Homeland Security Departments responded by freezing all pending applications for up to 45 days. This stopped the H-2B application process in its tracks and created a major approval backup at U.S. embassies worldwide. Businesses could not get their H-2B staff approved and were left without help at the start of this season. Today, 25 to 30 of my small business clients still wait for final approval while the season is in full swing. Because we are experiencing delays now, some small tourism-based businesses are taking extreme measures to survive. These include turning business away because of staff shortages. Here's an example. Along the New England coast, there's a small inn with a restaurant. Here, the middle of June, the owner has been unable to offer dinner because her H-2B cooks are stuck in the approval process. She's losing reservations. In fact, there was a planned wedding reception that could not go on because of inadequate staff. The owner has resorted to cleaning guest rooms herself while her H-2B housekeepers are waiting in their home countries for approval. When some of this year's approvals resumed at the Labor Department, businesses were told flat out to pay their H-2B workers much higher wages in order to continue with the program. For most of our businesses, the new mandated wages went up 10 to 34% per hour. In dollar amounts, we saw an increase of $3 to $8 per hour per employee, including American workers who do the same jobs. Businesses cannot survive with this type of sudden labor cost increase. All of this from a Labor Department that told the ruling judge that subsequent wages would increase, quote, at most $2.12 per hour, end quote. Over the past 2 years, Congress has repeatedly blocked the Labor Department from implementing prevailing wage increases that burden struggling small businesses. We strongly encourage Congress to act again. Please encourage the Departments of Labor and Homeland Security to rescind the interim final rule and replace it with a more reasonable approach to setting wages, as was done under 2008 regulations. One approach might be the H-2B wage language that is included in S-744, the immigration bill currently being debated in the Senate. It's also important that the departments implement a new and more reasonable approach to setting wages without shutting down the H-2B program and cause further processing delays on already struggling small businesses. As you know, small businesses are the backbone of the U.S. economy. Many and popular tourism destinations are dependent on international workers with H-2B visas to have successful seasons. They cannot thrive without adequate staff and with the uncertainty of when they will become available. Businesses cannot show a successful bottom line if they're hobbled by bureaucratic delays and decision-making that imposes unreasonable and non-competitive wage rates. Thank you for your time. I'll be pleased to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Bishop. Now comes the part where we put you on the frying pan. No. I have a few questions, and Mr. Spriggs, I want to start with you. I'm a little confused about your testimony. Are you saying that the H-2B program is bad law and should be eliminated, or do you think it provides a valid piece of the employment picture for small businesses in these areas that have low populations and high tourist, big tourist destinations?
Chairman, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify my testimony since I rushed through it so much, and I appreciate you doing that. Let me be clear. The big problem is, as was mentioned, an uncertainty around regulation, but the regulation has to be the correct regulation. And I believe the correct regulation includes paying wages that are the average wage for the occupation for which the worker would come in. Otherwise, the wages are lowering the average wage in the area. It's just the arithmetic of it.
Let me clarify. So
yes.
You are saying that the H-2B is a valid program, it's good law, you're questioning about the regulations, correct?
That's correct. And part of the regulations that are not being implemented would have further improved two key elements. One, the recruitment of American workers. The other is the oversight of foreign labor recruiters. Many employers here in the U.S. don't see those foreign labor recruiters. They're invisible to them. They don't know what those recruiters are doing, and we need the ability to have oversight over the use of them. So I'm not saying that the law is bad, but the proper regulation needs to be in place. The sooner Congress and the administration can coalesce around rules that protect the wages of American workers, ensure real recruitment of American workers, and end the abuse of foreign labor recruiters, the sooner I think we have a program that can help everyone.
We thought we were coalesced until the spring of this year, and somehow we got uncoalesced. I guess the administration made the decision we weren't coalesced. Thank you, sir. Mr. Dean, Ms. DeMint, let me ask you, what's the problem? Why don't we just hire American workers? Why do we need this program?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you point out, we want to hire American workers. The businesses I represent want to hire full-time permanent American workers. We would like to see those numbers grow, and I suspect everyone here today would agree with that. The simple fact of the matter is this, that when you see a seasonal tourism destination like your community, Myrtle Beach, where millions of visitors come in a short period of time, we just simply don't have the labor, and it takes a different business model. Let me put it in perspective that perhaps Congress can relate to. Just imagine if 3 out of every 5 of your committee hearings, 3 out of every 5 of your office visits, and 3 out of every 5 of your pieces of legislation you pass had to get passed or occur in the months of June, July, and August. I dare say that you would staff and operate your offices and your committees differently, and that's what we face. So the simple fact of the matter is we don't have the number of American workers to fill those jobs during the peak season, and we simply have to utilize the H-2B visa program. It's a small but very important part of our seasonal tourism economy.
Ms. DeMint?
I would say in Maine, the seasonality issue and the fact that we are so rural just doesn't allow us to have enough workers to be able to fulfill the jobs in the season. And it's not that we don't want to hire American workers, and we have 75 to 85% of our workforce is American workers. We're looking to shore them up during the busiest time of the year when we have 50,000 people in our town on a daily basis. Having that resources to pull from is the problem in many rural communities around the country who are operating these great destinations that people come to because they're out of the way, yet these rural destinations don't have the workforce available to support the demands of the traveling public.
Thank you, Ms. DeMint. Mrs. Bishop, do these workers get paid less than American workers would in the same job, in the same circumstance?
No, in fact, they're paid more. There's something called prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is a wage that is much more than minimum wage. And in fact, businesses that use it are at a disadvantage, competitive disadvantage, because they do have to pay so much more than someone who does not participate in an H-2B program. The problem now is that the new prevailing wages are going up while the season is already in swing. It's already started.
Who determines the prevailing wages? The innkeeper?
The Department of Labor, if you participate in the H-2B program.
So the Department of Labor tells you what you have to pay.
That's correct. It tells the employers that the wage is, well, in the case of one client, it went from $15 an hour, no, I'm sorry, excuse me, $13 an hour to $21 an hour. That's 21 workers, this client now has to pay $21 an hour. His fees are not set for that wage.
And let me clarify one other thing. If somebody participates in this and they hire these foreign workers at this wage, do the American workers that work there get paid less?
No. If an American is doing the same job, they also must be paid prevailing wage. So if you are paying a wage of, so I can use round figures, $10 an hour to Americans, prevailing wage came in at $11 an hour. Even the Americans, if they're doing the same job, now get $11 an hour.
So just so I can be crystal clear about this, if somebody elects to participate in the H-2B program, then the Department of Labor sets the wage rate they have to pay, and everybody, American, foreign, whether they come through this program or not, get paid that prevailing wage. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Dean, in your experience, why don't American workers apply for the seasonal jobs you're seeking to fill? Could you elaborate on the responses that your members get from American workers to their recruiting efforts?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is perhaps one of the most common questions about this program. Why is it when we have an unemployment rate in our community that will range anywhere between 8 and 12% this year, do these jobs go unfilled? I suspect that part of the reason is that the workers that are unemployed are looking for full-time permanent jobs. Now, that is the main source of jobs in our community, but most of those unemployed are not looking for a job that lasts 60 to 90 days. And it may be that some of them have found they can subsist on other government programs like unemployment insurance for that time as opposed to entering the workforce. I can't speak for other communities, but what I can tell you, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, we have thousands of college students who enter the summer workforce. We have retirees who reenter the workforce. We bring employees from outside the county in, and even still, that's not enough. So clearly, there is a gap between the number of workers needed and the number that we're able to hire. And many of those who are unemployed are just simply choosing not to participate in the competition for these jobs. Most of the businesses would prefer to hire a local employee, but that's never been possible in good and bad economic times, and therefore we need the seasonal tourism employees to help our tourism businesses succeed during the peak season.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. This time I'm going to yield to Mr. Payne for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in light of the topic that was just being discussed, Mr. Spriggs, it's been suggested that the impact, of the H-2B program on our economy has been to depress wages for both domestic and foreign workers. Can you explain in detail how the recent Department of Labor regulations addresses the wage issue and explain how they can impact small businesses?
Yes, thank you. So the wage is set at the average wage for that particular occupation in that particular metropolitan area, or if it's rural, then that particular non-metropolitan area. The Occupational Employment Statistics Survey that is used is big enough to pinpoint very specific occupations. So in the cases of food preparation workers, that's one category. A busboy is another job category. A short order cook is a different category. So it's able to fine-tune to very precise occupations, and on a basis of a very large survey of employers covering over 1.2 million American establishments, 62% of American employment, we're able to accurately tell you what is the average wage of people in that occupation in that specific sub-state area. So that is what is the prevailing wage. If you offer a wage below that, you're lowering the average wage in that occupation in that very specific region. Now, some areas use H-2B workers, but there are many tourist areas that do not. Atlantic City, near you, does not have any H-2B applications on record for fiscal year 2012. Reno, Nevada, which is in a remote area as well, 0. Tunica, Mississippi, 0. So this isn't something that's used universally in the tourism industry or in tourism locations. My area where I went to high school, Virginia Beach, almost all of those H-2B applications are for landscaping. There's only one for food prep workers. So this isn't a universal model for how resort areas work. But we do need to have rules that we agree on, and I think the more sound policy, because these occupations are very finely tuned, is to have just the average wage. What has happened is back in 2008, the courts ruled that using a 4-tier wage level and arguing that some workers could be brought in under the guise that there's some lower tier within being a busboy didn't make economic sense. The Department of Labor had not made a case for the 4-tier wage level, and in reviewing the 4-tier wage level, the Department rejected the idea that there were 4 different wage levels for these very narrow bands of occupations, and that the average wage made the most sense.
Okay. Now, Mr. Mint, critics of the H-2B program argue that American workers could fill these positions, but we're hearing that might not be the case. How rigorous are your recruitment activities around that, and do you feel that they go beyond existing recruitment requirements? How vigorous do you attempt to recruit American workers?
Weekly to daily. Honestly, it will depend on what is happening at the hotel at that time. We're obviously pulling people to work in housekeeping right now, so there are times when my general manager cannot put out her advertising for housekeepers because she's working in housekeeping. We're recruiting all of the time. We are talking to our employees every day about who they know, who could they recommend, who could come in. However, I do have to screen people. I am asking housekeeping to clean rooms with personal belongings, and not everyone is appropriate for the job. People who come in may decide that a seasonal job is not what they're looking for. And the purpose of H-2B for us is to support our year-round workforce. So I'm not offering year-round jobs right now. I'm looking to fill and support the people who are already there, the American workforce that is already working for us. Barring dragging people from Bangor, Maine last weekend, I've done everything I can think of at the moment.
So basically, you use it just to supplement during your peak time of business, and your primary workforce is American.
75 to 85% without the H-2B. Right now, it's 100%. But I am also working short. I see this as a supplement. I see this as a time when we are competing with every other hotel, restaurant, retailer, amusement park for summer business on the coast of Maine. 18,000 hotel rooms are a lot of rooms to clean every day in the summertime. We just don't have the population and the ability and the availability of Americans during the height of the season.
Okay. And can you further explain how the move from the self-attestation to a certification-based model in the DOL rules could harm your ability to obtain these visas?
So you're speaking of prevailing wage?
Yes.
We set our rates in advance in the coastal communities. Most of our people come to us year after year. They reserve reservations a year in advance, and we base our rates based on our forecast and our budget, as most small businesses do. So when the prevailing wage comes in, not until the spring, I've already set my rates in the December beforehand. So I'm already working in a gray area as to what I'm going to be paying any workers who are coming in to supplement our regular workforce. There's already a level of ambiguity there. When they came in this year, the initial prevailing wage came in at a range that is appropriate for my area and what we pay for housekeeping. It was then modified to be about $1.15 more. That is an expense to my biggest department that has to be paid to not only H-2B employees, but to our American workers. And it then ripples out into every other department who says, why are you paying housekeeping more than you're paying a person in the food service department, or an entry-level front desk employee, or a person who we hire in the maintenance department to clean up trash and clean off the lawn chairs. So it's a bigger picture overall for us. It affects every person who works at the hotel. It also sets me up as having unfair competition for the hotel next door, who might be 50 rooms, but has chosen not to utilize the H-2B program for whatever reason. Their costs are much lower than ours, yet they probably have set their rates at the same time that we've set ours.
Okay. Let's see. So, Mr. Spriggs, once again, I understand that, the critics of the H-2B visa program believe that it has a negative effect on American workers. They suggest that employers prefer temporary workers to keep costs low. While I believe cost is a factor, could it also be that more Americans are advancing their education so they don't seek temporary work?
In the current labor market, Americans are very desperate.
Right.
And so I don't think that's the issue. And as I mentioned before, this is not a model everywhere. Tunica, Mississippi is a very remote area, but they don't use the H-2B program in Tunica, Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So I think it is particular to certain areas. And I would say the program, while we have model employers here, and the people here are honest, hardworking businesses, we know there are many violations of the program where the program has been abused. And the regulations need to reflect those who misuse the program and hurt those who are trying legitimately to run their businesses. Without the implementation and the clarity for all employers of clear set rules, so we don't have violations that no one on this panel would agree with. No one on this panel would agree that foreign labor recruiters should be extorting the workers who are working for them. But you need regulations in order to weed out those violations of those foreign labor recruiters. You need regulations to avoid those who are abusing the program. And so we need Congress to coalesce with the administration on these meaningful corrections to a program that we have on record, these many violations that you mentioned in your opening statement. Those are facts, they have happened, and we need regulations to avoid those.
Absolutely. I think that's very important to, as Mr. Spriggs stated, that for Ms. DeMint and Ms. Bishop and Mr. Dean, we want to try to weed out the people that are not playing by the rules that you're playing, and that is the root of a great deal of my concern. You're doing everything you need to do, but there are people that are in your industry and your competition that are cutting corners, and I think that's where Congress and the administration come in and trying to level that playing field. And Mr. Dean, the cap for non-agricultural foreign workers is only 66,000 people. The program has to contend with a wide range of industries and a growing need for labor. Certainly, specialty and smaller firms may not have the same access as larger companies. How do you see the tourism industry growing in terms of the workforce and demand or lack thereof? And just on a personal note, I was in Myrtle Beach for the first time, my first time in South Carolina several months ago for the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, met there, and got to hear your presentation and the things. So I know you're recruiting, and I know your tourism business. You're a great advocate. But to my question.
Certainly. Well, we're delighted you were able to make it. As you probably are aware, in the middle of the summer, Myrtle Beach is the ad hoc capital of the state of New Jersey, with as many New Jersey license plates that frequent there. The cap is a challenge for us. It would seem to me that it's a relatively arbitrary level that could and should be reviewed regularly. In our community, we will not hire the number of temporary seasonal workers we need. And that's been true for several years, even in the recessionary environment that we face now. Our tourism industry has grown more than most in recent years. But the simple fact of the matter is, Congressman, that the cap, while we understand it needs to be regulated and there does need to be a mathematical analysis of those workers necessary, in the Myrtle Beach area, the cap tends to be a limit that limits us far too much. Now, part of that may be the timing of our season. Part of it may be the fact that I represent a lot of independently owned businesses, a lot of third and fourth generation businesses. And one other point I would offer, I think you make a great point on the regulation, and all of us agree that Congress does have a role and a responsibility to regulate this. But I would offer this, that for those few businesses that aren't following the rules, just because rules are being broken doesn't mean the system is broken. And I'm glad to hear this committee express your appreciation for those small businesses that are following the rules. We certainly should regulate this reasonably, but we shouldn't punish those who are playing by the rules just simply because others have chosen not to. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mulvaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everybody for coming out. I always am impressed with people willing to take the time out of their schedules to come, especially long distances from Maine and South Carolina to do this. And it is extraordinarily helpful. What you're doing today is helping to drive the debate. This doesn't look like it's very well attended, but these reports will go out to all members of Congress. These things will be printed and reported by the folks who are here, and this will become part of the debate on this program and probably on a larger discussion on immigration, which we'll talk about in a second. I'm also glad you were here to talk about the H-2B program, because I'm not as familiar with it as I am the H-2A program. My district is more agriculturally oriented than it is tourist. It sounds to me like there's a lot of overlap. I talked to my farmers. They have some of the same difficulties about the change in prevailing wages in the middle of the season. They talk about the delay. I wasn't aware that the DOL had actually stopped processing. I know that in the past several seasons they have delayed processing. Whereas the program used to be able to reliably produce legal migrant workers in 6 weeks, and if you asked for those migrant workers 7 weeks before the peach crop came in, you could usually count on getting your folks in. When they switched that from 6 weeks to 6 months, we've actually seen businesses in my district go out of business because of that delay. Whereas some folks have the opportunity to sort of stretch and get through if you're relying on this program for 90% of your workforce during your peak times. Again, you got folks talk about 60% of your business during the summer. If 90% of your business comes during a particular harvest season and you can't get the workers, then you are quite literally out of business. So I appreciate the input. Just out of curiosity, Ms. Bishop, you probably know a good bit about the program. My farmers have to provide food and housing, and to a certain extent maybe even clothing, to their legal migrant workers under the H-2A program. Is it similar in the H-2B or not?
The H-2Bs do not have to provide housing, but almost all of my clients do provide subsidized housing, because it is difficult to find housing when you're coming from a foreign country and you don't know the area. So if you are going to run a business that participates in H-2B, you have usually secured housing. It's seasonal housing, and it is also offered to American workers in the newspaper ads that they run and in the job bank listings, so that if Americans are able to take the jobs and they can't say, gee, I don't have housing, well, we have subsidized housing for you. So they do that.
In the ag program, you have to be able to establish that you've taken certain steps in order to attract American workers to the job. So the same rules apply here?
They're very similar rules. There needs to be, the job needs to be posted on the statewide job bank for at least 10 days. There needs to be 2 very detailed newspaper ads, not the little tiny ad, but the big expensive ones that tell you everything about the job. And that needs to run on 2 days in during that 10-day period, one of them being a Sunday. And any American that applies for that job, You do everything you can to get that American in to be interviewed, anything from, scheduling the interviews to a time that's appropriate for the worker who wants to come and take your job or try to take their job. And chances are that in all that I do and all the ads that I have placed, we can run ads and receive absolutely no Americans apply for it. And some of these jobs are $12 to $15 an hour jobs with flexible schedules, and I can't get a single American to apply for it.
My farmers tell the same story. There's a farmer who has actually kept the paperwork on the last 1,000 workers who showed up to pick peaches, and he can prove to you in writing that one of them lasted more than a week. So I think what I'm hearing here is the same from my farmers, which is they would much rather hire American citizen workers. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's more effective, but they're doing this as a last resort. Mr. Spriggs, I got one question for you. And when we talk about that database, if we have the database for bus boys in the Myrtle Beach market, we have this average wage. They can look in it, and there's an average wage. Some folks are making 10, some folks are making 12, some folks are making 14, right? Is that how it pretty much works? Not without those specifics. Okay. Why are you arguing for a system that pays migrant workers more than American workers?
No.
You are. I mean, if you're averaging, if there's 3 workers in the market, one makes 8, one makes 10, and one makes 12, and those are 3 American workers, and you're arguing that a migrant worker should make the average, that's $10, you are arguing that that person should make more than the American worker making $8.
Let's remember the previous answer. So you're paying the average because that's the average wage for the area, and the simple math, right, is that if you bring in people below the average, you're pulling down the average. An American who works at that establishment then must be paid the same wage that you are offering to the H-2B worker.
And the American who works across the street is going to be making less.
It's a free labor market, and Americans are aware of the wage distribution. But the idea here is that we don't want to pull down the average wage of Americans. And if you bring in a set of workers—
Actually, you wouldn't be pulling down the average wage of Americans if we're making 12, 10, and 8.
If you have 12, 10, and 8, and
Right.
you bring in somebody who makes 8,
Yeah.
now the simple math, right, is now you've just lowered the average.
No, I haven't, because my 3
Yes,
Americans
you have two- you have
my
2
3
and 8.
Americans who are there are still making 8, 10, and 12. I haven't drawn down the salaries or wages of any American. I have paid the migrant worker lower than the average, but the 3 Americans who were in that market beforehand are still making 8, 10, and 12. None have seen their wages come down.
The average wage for the occupation has now shifted down. So if
True,
I
but
come,
the average
if
wage
I come,
received by Americans is the same.
if competition is that we're going to have lower the average wage in the area, then yes, you will affect future Americans who go to look for the job.
I'm glad to hear the Afl-Cio is arguing for wage competition. Mr. Dean, very quickly, and to you, Ms. DeMint, tell me what this means for growth, for your businesses, Mr. Dean, and yours in particular, Ms. DeMint. Are you able to grow your businesses if you can't find people to work?
No, Congressman Mulvaney, as you well know, in tourism, this is a service industry. It's not a manufacturing industry where we can turn the assembly line off. We have to serve our customers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. If you cannot provide the necessary labor to serve your customers, then you simply can't accommodate them. The best case scenario is that you underperform. The worst case scenario is that your business actually declines instead of growing. And in our view, the system has worked well in the past. It could work better, but the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, applies here.
Ms. DeMint, what are the chances of you growing your business in the current labor environment?
None. I take people out of other departments to assist the department that's short-staffed, and thus I'm not able to get them to do jobs that would increase the revenue or increase the sales and the availability of what they're doing. So if my food service people are in stripping rooms out to get them ready for the next guests, I'm not selling food and beverage. So there is no growth.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to go over on my time.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Mulvaney. Next, we have Congressman Barbour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. This is a very important area of discussion back home in my community. And my first question, Mr. Spriggs, is for you. Let me just explain a little bit about the community I represent. First of all, I would have to say there's nothing that I agree with more, that we have to find jobs for Americans. We're making progress. It's way too slow. Way too many people in my community are out of work, and they need it, and we need to do everything we can to grow their opportunity. But the tourism industry in my community in Tucson and southern Arizona is a very big deal. It accounts for $2.3 billion in spending just in metropolitan Tucson alone. And, you know, I'm concerned that those businesses who have a peak season that starts around October and goes through March, and no one really wants to come there in August. I believe me, I'm dreading going back in August myself. But clearly we have a very important peak period, and we need to fill them. So, Mr. Spriggs, my question to you is, in your opinion, what more can we do, we in Congress and we in our communities, to help better match up American job seekers with our small tourism businesses? What more can be done?
And I appreciate the question. It's one thing to say I posted a job on the Internet. It's another to actually reach the American workers who are unemployed. And while people feel that they are meeting the needs of the regulation, it's clear when we see job openings appear, if Walmart says that they are looking for workers, people line up around the block. So there's a level of publicity that we know works in reaching American workers. We don't see in the record, if you look at fiscal year 2012, any H-2B applications from Tunica, Mississippi, which is a very rural area. So the idea that Americans won't do this type of work, well, Americans do this type of work. In Reno, Nevada, there are no H-2B applications. People in America do this kind of work. We are a hard-working people in America. So I think it's the ability to really reach Americans. And the problem is that we are bottling up the regulations that the Department of Labor was trying to put in place to improve the process of recruiting and reaching American workers. It's not just the department's fault. There are court cases. Congress has consistently intervened into the implementation of the rules. So creating the crises that these businesses are suffering through now is the result not of the administration, but of the courts and of Congress interfering with the implementation of a set of rules that would have improved the recruitment of American workers and would have prevented the abuse of foreign labor recruiters that we know turns this program into a very ugly type of program. Those things have to be cleaned out.
Thank you, Mr. Spriggs. My next question is for both Mr. Dean and Ms. Bishop. Same question. Let me just set it up this way. My wife and I were former small business owners for 22 years. We never had to use this visa program, but many of our community do. We hear on this committee a lot about the amount of red tape and bureaucracy that hurts small businesses from developing, from growing. And I really want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce or eliminate it. So, Mr. Dean and Ms. Bishop, to the same question, you have spoken about the inefficiencies within the H-2B program, including paperwork, long processing delays. Could you give us specific recommendations of what we should do, what we can do to streamline the program and make it easier for small tourism businesses who need the program while still guaranteeing the protection of American jobs?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm glad to hear that question, because I think that's what a lot of small businesses are asking you to do, is to make this process more efficient. In our community, we actually have hoteliers who will start this hiring process in October for a temporary seasonal employee that actually arrives in June. That's an 8-month period. I suspect that part of the reason for that is because of the recruiting that has to go on, and we agree with that. We don't question that at all. I also suspect that part of the reason for that may be the fact you can have as many as 4 governmental agencies involved in this process. Now, Some of that, referencing the ranking member's comments earlier, is because of that necessary oversight that the Federal Government has to provide to protect American workers. We understand that. We embrace that. We certainly agree with that. But there may well be some opportunities to reduce the paperwork and the handoffs between the agencies, and also to consider perhaps a slightly reduced administrative process for those returning workers. Not all of the workers that come for the seasonal jobs are returning workers, but many of them are. In fact, many return to the same properties year after year after year. So it might well provide some opportunities not only for those businesses but for the Federal Government agencies involved to make the process more efficient in that regard.
Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, may I ask Ms. Bishop to respond?
You're indulged.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bishop, please.
There are a few things that can make this program much more streamlined. We agree with the process in that you do need to make sure and test the market for American workers. But in many seasonal areas, there is negative population growth, negative. Or the population may be, in our area, 66% is over the age of 65 or under the age of 17. They're not there. But as far as the process, I think one of the things that would be very helpful is for the U.S. embassies to just let returning workers drop off their passports, do their fingerprints, and then approve them. They are coming repeatedly. You can check a record on a computer that shows that they paid their taxes, they didn't overstay their visas, they worked their jobs, they did everything correctly. You don't need to schedule an embassy appointment that's 2 to 3 to 4 weeks later, making the workers arrive much later. That would be a great thing if we could get the State Department to do that. I think the other thing that would be really well done if we could do it is when we do the third step of this four-step process, which is Department of Homeland Security, it would be great if we could e-file those applications and pay for those with a debit card instead of having to file documents this much to get 10 workers into the country. That would be a big lifesaver because the Labor Department, to their credit, is now doing an e-filing process for both the prevailing wage and both the labor certificates, and we embrace that. We think that's great. Now let's get the other agencies to do the same, and we would be very happy.
Well, thank you for that last suggestion. I'm on the Oversight Subcommittee of the Homeland Security Committee. I'll definitely take that up and see what we can do. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony and participation today. While the H-2B visa program is relatively small, it is a vital source of temporary legal foreign workers used by small businesses that cannot find enough American workers to fill their seasonal job openings. The temporary suspension of the program and the mid-season wage rate increase pose real challenges for small tourism businesses. We will continue to work with the small business community to ensure that the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Labor examine whether increasing labor costs on small businesses utilizing this program is appropriate given the slow economic recovery. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the records. Without objection so ordered, this hearing is now adjourned.